Okay, some people say let's do it. Some people are terrified right now.
Do it.
Why don't we switch it over to Monique, and then maybe if maybe y'all can warm up to this idea. I got a fan. I don't have fans for everybody else. Where the fans at? You gotta stay ready. Okay. Why don't we go back to our home page, maybe? You wanna go back to the main screen?
You had a slide that had the story.
Yeah.
Go back to that.
Yep.
So I'll just talk a little bit about why I wanted to cover the story and the approach to the story that I took. When I was interviewing Dr. Alicia, we had a long interview. I think all of our talks were long, but you know, I never intended for it to be that way, but just talking to people like herself with just a wealth of knowledge is always how it ends up going. And I asked her, like, you know, why this name? How did you arrive to Before Cowboy Carter, and the impact of that? And she was like, well, I actually had no intentions on this title at all. I had like I think you had said 4 or 5 different titles. She knew, like she said earlier, she wanted to do a course on Black towns because of her research. But she needed that hook, essentially, to get students in. And it's the hook that got me in as well. You know, as a journalist, we're looking for things that are trendy and catchy in a way, but also it has to have meaning and an impact and a community impact. And for me, one, I was like, wow, disclaimer, I am a member of the Beehive, so that was the hook. That was all the hook I needed. Let's just start there. But then when I started, you know, the name of the class, Before Cowboy Carter, and I was like, talking about Black history at a time right now where we're used to, and look at what we're seeing when, you know, in this political climate where our history is trying to be eradicated. And so to me, this was a way for me to play a small part in helping to preserve that history and tell this story. And also just to kind of backtrack before that, U of H, University of Houston, if you're not from here, I covered when Senate Bill 17 and the impacts of that. And if you're not familiar, it's called the anti-DEI ban, which essentially removed diverse equity and inclusion programs and hiring practices. It's a long dragged out bill, but it removed that from a lot of public institutions, U of H being one of those. And I covered those protests from students who were protesting the removal of the LGBTQ Resource Center, their DEI office, you know, anything that had anything to do with diversity in a formal office and program was being eradicated. And I stood out there in the blistering heat. Y'all who have lived in Houston or live here now, you know what I mean when I say how hot summers get here. And these students, you know, were barely drinking water. That's how passionate they were. And tears were flowing from their eyes. They stood out there for hours to protest the closure of this. But of course, it's a public institution. They get state funding, federal funding. They had to do what they had to do when this bill came out. And so I've seen one end of the dissatisfaction, the contempt, the anguish, the frustration, the anger from students about the removal of DEI. And then a couple years later, fast track, you see in the curriculum side of things, you see that same institution doing a course like this. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, while this is still here, I want all parts of this. And so I heard about the course. I think actually Cron.com wrote about it coming to Houston. And so I started reaching out like, hey, when does this class start? So I'm trying to think back to, it's been a while since I've been out of school. So I'm like, when does spring semester start? I'm trying to like get ahead of that. So I reached out to them and said, hey, like, I would love to talk to Dr. Alicia, but can I take the class? Is that an option? And I think they were a little like, why? Like a little, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Alicia, but they were just kind of thrown off by my approach. And I was like, no, like I want to do something on the story. I'm going to write a story, but like time is of the essence. Like when does the class start? And it took a little while, going back and forth. And this is something that Alicia and I actually talked about, how from a public institution standpoint, how they were originally treating this class as just, it was as if it was any other class. I never saw it that way. I always saw it as this is preserving history, whether it's through me, how I'm telling the story, through Alicia on how she teaches the story. but they from the beginning were treating this as a regular class, and I knew it was anything but. And so then, of course, when we started getting involved, the next thing you know, you got to run it by this person, you got to run it by that person. So it becomes a whole thing, right? But to me, I viewed it as an accountability story from the very beginning. Not in a formal investigation, right? But I viewed it as an accountability story for the institution by me just showing interest, you know, and other publications as well who went on to cover it in various different ways. That is important, and it sends a message. It sends a message to these institutions that, hey, this content is important, these students like it, it's catching the attention of news media, and it's all the more reason to preserve stories like this, preserve classes like this. And also, Dr. Alicia is, I hope I can share this, she's a professor of practice, and it's something she also disclosed to me in our interview. And so in my head, I think you also said that I can't remember exactly what she said, but essentially professor of practice, meaning she's on a contract, right? And so in my head, I'm like, oh, we definitely got to write about this, you know, because that's sending a message, right? The importance of her class. And so, yeah, that's just a little bit about why I wanted to write about this story, but also take this class in this way. And just sit in and be like a fly on the wall. You know, as journalists, we're always talking about like color and just wanting to get, okay, this one student came in with, I think she had a cowboy, like the Renaissance sparkly silver hat, and right away Dr. Leesley's like, yes, that's what I want to see. That's in my story, you know. So I just wanted to capture the look and the feel of this class, the excitement of the students who were taking this class. And it was about 20 students or so, and she was telling me how almost none of them were African American studies majors, which I found fascinating.